Economic invincibility is back. Today I want to discuss three aspects of feminist hypocrisy. We've been lectured by female celebrities for some years now about what feminism is supposed to be, and they say it's not the classic stereotype where if you're a feminist you hate men or you think women are better than men. But then the dude who played Hermione Granger in Harry Potter came out and she said, it's just about equality. We want the same opportunities as men, which is reasonable. In the United States today, women can vote, they can run for office, own property, get education, pursue careers. So I don't know what the issue is. Though you might say it has to be more extreme. We shouldn't shave our armpits. It's a big movement. It's like you'll be in good company. Chewbacca was successful, so do the same thing. But I just want to focus in on areas where feminist logic runs up against reality and they just kind of get all contorted. To begin, when Trump released his budget, which is not impressive, he moves money from one area to the next. It's not a cut at all. But this feminist wrote an open letter. She said there's reductions or elimination of these women's health funding programs. Then, of course, you have the funding of Planned Parenthood, potentially stopping that, and the SBA, the preferential loans for women, which give loans to women on the basis of their sex and nothing else. So this feminist was angry about that because she said it's part of the war on women. And I thought, how does that work? You believe men and women are equal. You wouldn't say a woman is weaker than a man or less capable, less intelligent. Why then are you arguing the government should pay for a program specifically for women? And in part, you're taxing men to fund it, by the way. How does that make any sense? Women should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. You say, no, it's for women's health. Well, I wouldn't expect women to pay for annual prostate cancer screenings for men, even though it's a big health issue. If you're independent, you can pay for your own health expenses, your health care and insurance. This idea that the government should fund it, but we're still equal is ridiculous. So a good feminist would be a strong libertarian. You'd say, I'm against these government programs because otherwise it undermines the idea that we're equal and we're competing on the same playing field. If a woman gets a 10-second head start in a race, is it really equality? What you're doing is you're replacing daddy, the patriarchy, with government, the patriarchy, because it's the same thing. Dad was probably kind of authoritative, maybe didn't let you date some people, controlled money, he'd smack you on the bottom if you were bad. The difference is you can walk away from him and he doesn't affect other people. When you go to the government to be your patriarchy, yeah, it has money. It can cause a lot of harm if necessary. It can punish you if you're not doing what it says, but it can also tax other people for it. So in other words, you're replacing one patriarchy with another, but it's hurting other people who then have their money taken away to pay for what you want. That's not feminism, that's dependency. Also, the government historically prevented women from voting, from owning property, from running for office. There were probably fathers back in the day who would like to have given their daughters land legally, but they couldn't do so based upon rules that were put in place. But again, we don't see this from feminists. No, it's sexist, whatever. We have to have the government provide these things. Well, but it undermines feminism. That's the problem. Another area you see it is with the whole enterprise of we need representation of women as cops, as firefighters in the STEM field. And in New York, I think it happened that some chick could not pass the firefighter test, but they gave her a job anyway. This has become more commonplace. It's an insult to the women who can pass it because it says, yeah, your efforts don't matter. We need a political standard, otherwise women won't be represented. But with STEM, it's almost worse because you have these folks who will say, we need more women in STEM. Well, let's get women who are good at math and science and let them do STEM. And they do exist. But the feminists would say, no, we need to open all these slots and pressure universities to take more STEM applicants who are women. And many of them are not even qualified. So what you'll have is they'll go in, and then the universities will have to change the standards for STEM because people will be failing out, and they'll say it's sexist if they fail out. That kind of logic makes no sense. Then you get to with the representation in the legislature. And they say, oh, well, we only have 20-some% of women in the Congress. Well, okay, get more women to run. Women have achieved it before. That's why they have women in office now. A woman got more votes in the presidential election last year. She didn't win, thank God, because of the Electoral College. But it's not like this country is anti-woman. The Attorney General before this one was a woman. There's a bunch of women on the Supreme Court. This whole notion that the government is conspiring against women is ridiculous. And they say, no, we need a 50% gender quota in the government. We need this many senators that are women, this many congressmen. It's nonsense. Why should the government come in and make a standard like that and say we have to mandate to put these people in power on the basis of what's between their legs? That is not equality by any stretch of the imagination. We're forcing it on you, and you could actually be losing out on talented people who would not meet those standards just because you're trying to make a political point. Women are more than capable, by the way, of getting to 50 or over 50% on their own terms, based upon their own abilities and efforts, if they want to. There's nothing stopping women from running for office, but feminists would have you believe, oh yeah, women are blocked at every turn from becoming politicians, which is just not true. The reason more men are in political offices is because it was initially founded by men. White Anglo-Saxons primarily put together the Constitution and the founding of the American Republic. So women can change that because there's nothing legally blocking them, but that's why it is. And I'm sure by the time I have kids, if I have kids, they'll teach in public school that the Hamilton Broadway musical, that's an accurate representation of what the founders looked like. And Benjamin Franklin will be a transsexual and have passionate interracial sex with George Washington, and everyone will cheer. But the point is, women can get into office. There's nothing blocking them from doing so. There's no need for gender quotas. That's just a lazy way of outsourcing your responsibility as a feminist to the patriarchal government. Then the third aspect has to do with the pay gap, supposedly, which has been debunked many times before. Oh, women are paid less. Well, when you start controlling for women taking off time for having kids or raising kids, men may be negotiating salaries. Women might not do that as much, although they say women are better negotiators, so maybe that study is baloney. They also have comparisons where if you take someone with the same ref job description, job title, but they're working in totally different companies, that might affect whether you're making the same amount of money or not. But in reality, when you control for everything, there's not much of a gap at all. It's just another way to create controversy. But supposing you're very passionate about that, instead of saying the government should pass some sweeping piece of legislation that says all men and women must be paid the same, regardless of circumstance, well, why don't you say something like, let's start our own companies as women and pay women equal pay? If you think it's that big of a deal, if you're not willing to look at the fact that these studies are not replicable, they're not scientific, if you really believe the wage gap is an issue, why don't you start a company and pay women equally? That's going to make a much bigger impact than going and saying we need another law and regulation that will cost a lot of money to enforce. And of course, we are in tons of debt. And it's not that women, everywhere you go, women are making less. It's based upon skewed data. It's based upon anti-scientific approaches to doing research. But again, people don't want to embrace that because, well, sexism. It's easier to cry sexism this, sexism that. Ultimately, you have to look at it in this way. The reason that a lot of the women who actually embody what feminists do, the ones who can pass the physical test, the ones who are in STEM, the ones who run companies, the reason why many of them do not use the label of feminist is because they see how much hypocrisy there is in what feminists spew. You say, oh, we're being discriminated against. Women are equal. Women have the same abilities as men. Well, then why don't you show that instead of constantly arguing that there's this mystical force of patriarchy holding you back? If you think there need to be more women in STEM, you can create programs to encourage women to be interested in engineering. Maybe you can enroll yourself if you can handle it instead of arguing that, no, the system is against us. That's the laziest excuse people make. The system is against us. And in fact, in most cases, there are men who can't get elected to the government. There are also men who can't do STEM. There's no conspiracy. It's just laziness on the part of feminists. So if you really want to advocate for feminism, make sure you are practicing and living the same principles. Are you dependent on the government and then you're saying, but I'm a strong feminist? That's not feminism. That's dependency. That's laziness. And that's what, unfortunately, passes nowadays as being a great activist. You want the government to take care of you, but you're a strong anti-establishment activist. Kind of like Bernie was supposedly against the establishment and then he endorsed Hillary Clinton without really getting much of a concession. It's a shame, but unfortunately, it predominates because no one challenges these people. We just assume, write your little thing on Jezebel or Huffington Post, and everyone's going to like it and share it because it must be true. Well, that is not feminism.